All right, a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, one last time. Thank you for being such good boys and girls, getting here on time and quieting down in time for me to get started here. We've just got one more session to get through before we can get to the real business of the day, I suppose, for the party, so to speak. Matt's birthday party after the conference hosted by the Port of Baltimore. That will be around the corner at the Pratt Street Ale House. I'll explain that in a second. Just a couple of points before we interrogate our panel this afternoon. We're going to do some live voting, which is going to be via the app that I've been blabbering on about all day. So in case you hadn't already downloaded it, if you care to now, we're going to use the app to do that voting. So take a few minutes to do that or familiarize yourself with the app. There's just a little button on there that says vote. When you go there, we're going to pop some questions there and give you a chance where we can take the poll and see the results kind of straight away. So we'll do that in a couple of minutes. A second thing, some of our staff, I believe, are going to send some iPads. Yeah, at some point this session, they're going to send some iPads around the room to just kind of send through. This is for our feedback, because we really value your feedback on this event. It's a pretty simple format, really. You just click some answers, and when you're done, you click submit if you want to fill it in, and then pass it along. So they'll just be going through the audience a bit throughout the session. So if you would just, indulge us with your opinion, we'd really value it. As I mentioned before, as soon as the session is over, we're going to stroll around the corner to the drinks reception hosted by the Port of Baltimore. It's at the Pratt Street Ale House. You literally just go out the main entrance to where the street is basically exploded, but there is a pathway that leads you. You just go left, and it'll be well marked out. It's less than a few minutes away. It'll be a great evening, some chance to sample some beers, some food, catch up a little bit more. Just be careful. Some of those beers are really strong, and they'll get you. So in case you're used, I know, in America, we're used to some lighter, sort of weaker beers sometimes, right? So just watch out. Says the guy in a country that drinks, warm, piss beer. But anyway, so. So yeah, we look forward to having you there. And I think that's all of my housekeeping notes. So I hope you all, so just before we go into the voting, I would like to introduce to you, the gentleman that we are very fortunate to have on the stage. And we're going to use the voting as a little bit of a way to kind of thought start, I suppose, the questions to them. So we get a chance to sort of get your opinions, and then we can kind of look at some of the interesting results and maybe discuss them a bit with our audience. With our panel. So just to introduce them to you, Mark Boucher, who's the Director of Vehicle Logistics for Volkswagen Group of America. We're very pleased to also have Alrick Duncan, Intercontinental and Port Operations Supervisor for General Motors, and Chuck Kendig, Assistant Vice President, Sales and Production Planning, Logistics at American Honda. So good spread there of some of domestic and international OEMs. Production between the three of them sort of crisscrosses the continent, and obviously some different strategies across all of them on vehicle logistics. So it sort of positions us for, not least across ports and shipping and stuff. So positions us for quite a good discussion, which we look forward to. But like I said, we have put together a couple of survey questions. Some of these have come from our sponsors, and some of them from us. And in fact, one of them is a question you actually were already posed earlier, but we thought we'd put it into a slightly more official format here. So once again, hopefully by now, you've downloaded the app or you're using the app. I guess just a very quick note, because we do have a live audience. Some people are watching this live outside the room. If you're watching this outside the room, you can just go to the vote tab or the polling tab, or if you're looking on a desktop, just scroll beneath, and the questions will pop up there. So our first question, which again you heard this earlier, but let's see if you change your mind at all after some of the other comments you've had, or if we can just count it, because I think the vote was pretty close. So TQ put this question to you earlier from Ports America. Which of the following has the most potential to improve railroad port operations? Again, would you say it was value chain collaboration? Would you say it's advanced analytics? Would it be to leverage the digital vehicle, the connected car, or would it be what you can learn from container terminals? So if you can give us your vote again, we can get the tally in total. So it hasn't really changed. I think that was actually almost exactly the score we had before. We weren't sure if we can count it correct or if Charles Franklin managed to change your mind a little bit. He's still got some work to do maybe on that. But still, most of you still see the connected car as the biggest opportunity for railroad port operations. But of course, value chain collaboration is still really important. So next question is also from our sponsor, ProAct. And what would you say, what is the most important in selecting an operator for port operations? Is it the people? Is it the systems? Is it the size, so the size of a terminal or space? Or is it the reputation of the operator? Let's vote now. Well, it's almost half of you putting people over systems, which is quite interesting. It doesn't surprise me too much because this is a very people-oriented business. Whether that will still be the case in the next decade or not remains to be seen, but still very much about the people. And so well, you can keep coming to our conferences and making sure that you connect with the right ones then. Okay, let's talk a little about your outlook. Over the next 1 to 3 years, your company's investment outlook for port-related finished vehicle logistics, so whether it's shipping, terminal activities, inland transport, processing, IT, etc., will increase significantly, increase slightly, remain roughly the same, decrease slightly, or decrease significantly. Tell us about your outlook. So pretty positive, it's sort of going in line a little bit with Brandon said, although this morning, although the sales picture is on the decline, we still have high volume, still a dynamic sector. I mean, that's actually, 0% of you see any decrease coming. So you are very optimistic, or you're just, exactly looking at it from the right point of view. But I'm positive to see that most of you are looking towards some increases. So let's test that optimism again. How optimistic in terms of a positive impact or pessimistic for a negative impact are you over the upcoming NAFTA renegotiations and how it will affect your business? Are you very optimistic? Are you somewhat optimistic? Are you neutral about it? Are you somewhat pessimistic, or are you very pessimistic? So, by and large, still quite an optimistic outlook. You're in line with the general this morning. Most 44% somewhat optimistic. Majority of you are neutral to optimistic, so very few really on terribly pessimistic outlook. So if we look to Mexico shipping, and this is, I'm sure, something we might discuss a bit in this session, I'm talking about the ratio of imports from Mexico to the US and Canada moving by short sea versus rail. So this is the ratio, not the absolute number. Is the ratio of imports moving by short sea increasing compared to moving by rail? So you're starting to see more by short sea. Is the ratio of imports by rail increasing compared to short sea, or no real change so far? So let us know. Perhaps not surprising in a conference focused on shipping and ports that's that answer, but also very well, hopefully maybe there's some data to back it up. We've seen some starting to show that there is a shift. Most of you see more stuff starting to move by short sea compared to rail. Not that it's more yet, I think rail is still the dominant mode, but obviously something of a swing starting to happen. Again, touching on some of the things we talked about this morning, North American vehicle handling ports are facing the biggest infrastructure gaps in which area? In berth or drought capacity for larger ro-ro vessels, in inland transport connections, road, rail, intermodal, in yard space for parking and vehicle handling, in terminal facilities themselves for processing, post-manufacturing, accessory work, or in telecommunications connectivity, broadband, Wi-Fi, mobile cable. Where do you see the biggest infrastructure gaps? So again, perhaps most people focusing on what's their business at hand, and that's yard space, so parking and vehicle handling with the majority of answers, followed by the berth. So despite the statistics we heard this morning, what I think it was, 30-odd billion needed for inland road transports by the Port Association, but for this audience, it's really more about space for the vehicles themselves. Next question. So for visibility and tracking in ports, which of the following technologies will be used the most over the next 5 to 10 years? Will it be barcodes and manual scanning? Will it be satellite or GPS technology? Will it be RFID? Will it be telematics connected car technology, as we've heard about? Or will it be the old-fashioned spreadsheet, manual tracking, and email? You can be honest. We're not going to reveal who says what. So again, it's all in line. We could have predicted that, I suppose, from the other answer about connected car. That seems to be the biggest opportunity. I guess we should be encouraged that the spreadsheet and the manual tracking is going the way of the dinosaurs, but I'll still believe it when I see it. So next question. All right, we're going to ask you to look into the future in the next few questions before we go to the Q&A. In 10 years, I expect vehicles built in China to account for the following share of U.S. vehicle imports: 1% or less, up to 5%, up to 10%, up to 20%, or more than 20%. What share of U.S. vehicle imports may in the future come from China? So up to 5%, not a huge share, but obviously some of you seeing 10 and 20% in a lower margins. Obviously, we talked this morning about some of the announcements we've already seen, whether GM in small numbers, Volvo in small numbers, Ford soon in not so small numbers. So more than we've certainly seen before anyway, but still not overwhelming, not a huge amount. All right, what about in 10 years, the share of battery electric vehicles handled at U.S. or North American ports, let's say? This isn't a global picture, keeping it regional. What share will be battery electric vehicles? 5% or less, up to 10%, up to 25%, up to 50%, more than 50%. And pretty chunky number, actually, up to 25% by 46% of you see about a quarter of the vehicles you'll be handling. So, that's actually a pretty big number. If we get anywhere near that, I think there'll be some need to be some changes to terminals and facilities to manage that. But obviously, some interesting changes. So we have one more question. It's a similar sort of crystal ball. in 10 years, the share of vehicles handled with autonomous driving technology at ports will be, again, 5% or less, up to 10%, up to 25%, up to 50%, more than 50%. So a bit fewer on this. We have 41% of you seeing up to 10% within the next 10 years being autonomous, 5% or less. So most of you seeing, a good majority of you seeing fewer than 10%, or let's say 10% or fewer cars autonomous. So again, still not a small number in the grand scheme of things, but not yet becoming a dominant mode. So in 10 years' time, we'll come and, when we're all here, or maybe some of you that aren't retired, we'll check the answers and see how you did. So I hope that's a polling. That's really just like we say, a fun way to get a little bit of the temperature of the room and get some of your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed that. We're now going to, like we said, turn this into a panel discussion. I'll join my fellow panelists over here. And well, I think maybe we'll start because it came out from that poll, it came out in the last session, this sort of potential of the connected vehicle in terms of using telematics, in terms of communication. Chris from VNUT said that ECG in Europe anyway doesn't really see RFID as much of a future technology given this. What's the perspective from each of you perhaps on what that is in terms of what you're doing today, maybe it's looking at, and maybe what you see in the future. So maybe Chuck, if we can start with you. Is this something that Honda's looking at and starting to experiment?
Yeah, we had our connected vehicle vice president chat with us on Thursday about this, and we think for sure, rather than add another piece to the car, probably the piece that's going to be in there is going to be this probably 5.9 gigahertz spectrum that'll connect the vehicles on the road. And so, yeah, we think that'll be the technology we'll be using to identify where our cars and marshalling yards are and all the way through the pipeline to the dealer. Mm-hmm. Our best guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for General Motors, we're already there. We actually have OnStar. So our cars are already connected from that perspective. I think the biggest thing now is to get that technology for our import and export vehicles where we can actually use that technology to kind of track where our vehicles are at. So I know for General Motors, I mean, that is somewhere where we at as far as with the connectivity.
Yeah.
Yep.
When we look at any new technology or opportunity, we look at velocity, right? Velocity drives your footprint. It drives your car requirement. It drives basically all of your brick and mortar. The connected car technology is exciting because that will bring speed to market, right? Yeah. Think about flashes updates you do on vehicles in your ports, right? You have fully connected inventory. You could do that at 6 ports in the United States. One of our engineers in Germany could push that, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas today that's a manual process requiring a lot of labor, time, and money. So there's all sorts of operational efficiencies, and not just from the tracking, which could also create a lot of other efficiencies as far as knowing where vehicles are on those vessels when they come in, if you need to segment them in specific ways. So it's a very exciting technology.
So we're all in agreement that it's exciting, has a lot of potential, but and Chuck, you kind of alluded to it, but with your question, which sort of aced the panel in the last session, that obviously we don't have agreement yet on the transmission. There will need to be some standardization of the communication. Perhaps even some resistance from customer. I don't know. I mean, would we all be happy to think about our iPhone being opened up and used to be tracked on its way to us? I mean, what sort of barriers are in the way that we have to overcome in the shortish term? I mean, so this isn't something we're talking about for 10 years, 10, 15 years down the line, because if it's 10, 15 years down the line, then maybe we need to look at the stuff that's in between to improve these things.
I mean, I would say, again, I think for us, speaking of General Motors, where we have the technology in the vehicle, I think we would look more for the port processors to be able to communicate, to take that data and information we have and relate and bring it all together so that we, as the customer, can track the vehicles and understand what's going on. So I think that's where the expectation will lie for us.
I agree. I think that's the next step. So we work on our proprietary technology and our internal processes and improve that through the connected car. But then the next step is to go to our port processors and our transportation partners, and then ultimately to the other OEMs as well, right?
Great. Does anybody have any comments or questions on this kind of topic or anything else? I can dominate this, trust me. But I will look to the audience where we can. And of course, I'll check the app for when you want to feed in questions there. And there was a question earlier on the app from Sergère about RFID, because it's not totally redundant or dead yet. In fact, there are a number of we've been reporting on a number of applications in the US and also globally. So what do you think? Is that for you? It's not something you'd be looking at right now, or is it something you're kind of looking at in tandem to something like telematics?
We've done some pretty extensive study on RFID, and it's actually a great technology for tracking the vehicle, for tracking the asset. Where we find gaps in it is tracking processes and people. At the port level mostly, tracking where you might have people needing training or people missing things in cars, things like that. The RFID technology doesn't capture that.
Yeah.
So it's great for tracking the asset, not necessarily the process.
Yeah, we've considered and looked at that as we're always looking for visibility of the pipeline. We were talking about that earlier. It'd be great in the marshaling yards. Of course, it would require us to RFID readers everywhere. But then we lose that the rest of the way to the dealer, and so it doesn't really solve that problem very well unless the entire network of networks gets on board and uses that. So probably tough to do for a total pipeline visibility, it seems.
Yeah. John, anything?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty much the same standard. Yeah.
Okay. We got to find something they disagree on.
No, I mean.
And don't forget about these. We can also do a gladiator-style thing. So if you think you kind of agree with them generally, you can do your grid, and if not, we can sort of thumbs down it this way with the. So by all means, get involved. Coming back to something else that was in the vote right now, I think we had 63% of this audience anyway sees not necessarily the balance, but some of the ratio out of Mexico starting to move towards short C. So more interest in short C, more volume going towards short C compared to, let's just say more market share probably. I think today FCA announced that they would ship out of Lázaro to Grace Harbor. So I mean, things are definitely happening. All of you have some various strategies on this. Do you see any change from what you've been doing? Maybe we'll start with you, Mark. Volkswagen has kind of had a long-standing strategy between its vessel and rail. Obviously, there's the Audi plant now, which may change the mix a bit too. So you want to give us some perspective?
Certainly, yeah. We've had a hybrid strategy for years, serving the eastern U.S. by vessel out of Veracruz, and then the western points by rail. We have struggled, like most of the OEMs, with vandalism and damage on Mexican rail. It continues to be a problem. I will say that it's improved, but it's still not nearly up to standard. So we are looking at opportunities for short C. I think one of the issues is that we all are, and just like the ports that we have here in the U.S., there is a finite amount of space, particularly on the eastern side of Mexico. So that's a challenge for all of us, I think. But it is, for all intents and purposes, it's a safer route to get the products to market.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like Dave was saying, I mean, for us, we want options, right? I mean, we've experienced, I know on the rail side of business, we experience a lot of vandalism, right? And our short C options have grown, actually. We've just recently started shipping into Grace Harbor short C. Normally that would have went rail. Right. And the same thing with Asst. We normally would have went rail. But we pulled that out, those units out, and actually start shipping short C. So having that option definitely is always great for General Motors or all the other OEMs, sure, to have that short C option. So I think for us, that's definitely a good thing. And our volumes are growing via short C, so.
So since we started production in Celaya, we had a hybrid strategy. So about half of our volume goes short C through Veracruz up to the eastern coast, so Brunswick, Baltimore, and Davisville, Rhode Island. About a quarter goes up the middle with both FXE and KCSM. And then about a quarter goes West Coast short sea to local distribution in San Diego, Richmond, California, and Portland, Oregon. Our volumes are growing. Those ratios are staying about the same. It shifts a little bit west with just the way our sales volume shifts a little bit right now. And of course, we're seeing everyone else getting into the game. We're seeing congestion in the ports we're using. Other ports aren't really ready for the kind of volumes that I think most of the manufacturers are going to provide. We're about to get a neighbor about 11 miles to our east. Toyota will be down there, so we're trying to coordinate with them as best we can to make sure we all get a faster ride out of the country, whether it's rail or whether it's short sea.
And Charles talked about reducing damage. I imagine because he's speaking specifically from the Honda exports ex-NAFTA, right? So outside of, he said, avoiding the bad neighborhoods. Has that been something that you've looked at doing as well for the sort of intra-North America flows?
Well, so Charles had the brilliant idea, and he basically, I'm sure he's back there somewhere, so export has gone basically 100% truck to the ports and then out. So it's hard to, you don't get rail damage on the trucks. Cost effectively doesn't really work for the volumes we're dealing with. We have been working really hard with both FXE and KCS, and they've done a wonderful job at hardening the rail cars for us. Of course, the 1,000 troops in the Bajío region really has helped out tremendously, but recently we've solved that problem, but of course now the problem goes somewhere else where the troops are not. So the market's shifted, and so we're seeing an increase right now in vandalism and theft in different areas. So we changed tactics. We went as far as we were losing our batteries, quite a few batteries. So one of our little strategic or tactical deals was we took the battery's $100. The wire harness that gets destroyed is about $1,000 between parts and labor. It takes a long time to do it. We decided to once the car is loaded on the rail, we take the terminal heads off and strap them away from the battery. So if they do get on board and they steal the battery, they've just got a battery, and we haven't. And we're switching tactics here and there, working with the security guys to figure out how to mitigate at least the cost when it does happen. But we expect we'll be dealing with it for a good long time.
Yeah. Great, interesting. Anyone, questions from the audience? That beer's not coming to you any sooner. I'm sorry to tell you. My contract is definitely through to at least 5.
I think one thing I want to add to that, just as far as the Mexico option, is all the OEMs are looking at doing the short sea. I know for my team and what we're doing, we're starting to see a lot of congestion now at majority of the ports in Mexico, and I know that could be a big bottleneck in the supply chain. And for us, and I'm not sure on the other OEMs, but our North America revenue recognition that we look at, that causes a lot of problems, for us. And some of the ocean carriers out here, they know and they understand that, that is very important. So I think as the volumes grow in Mexico, the congestion and those different ideas and infrastructure needs to be improved as we continue to have that volume switch.
Yeah.
When you talk about the congestion too, the other piece of that Mexico puzzle is a lot of the theft and vandalism happens when the rail cars or the trucks or whatever stop, when your freight's not moving, right? So the best way that we have found to avoid the issue is to not stop, right? It's not a reasonable expectation all of the time, but you want to keep the freight moving and not congested anywhere. It's a very good point.
Has the sort of rising inventory that we're sort of seeing kind of hindered that, made it a bit more difficult in terms of, hard to keep things flowing when there's certain slowness and slack in the market?
Yes. Simple answer to that, yes.
We actually had a question on the app because we don't want to forget our northern friends. So the question was, how do you ship from Mexico to Canada? Do you use rail? Do you use short sea? Maybe I'm just a simple question, but what's the...
Yeah, so for Honda, we go rail.
Yeah.
Yeah, straight up interchange.
So all the Mexico to Canada volume goes via rail? Yeah.
Let's do it, 100%.
Same for you.
Yeah, we do both, short sea.
You do both?
Yes, we do short sea and rail, yep.
And this is maybe just kind of logistics 101, but is it just that for just doing 100% rail, is it just that much more effective and faster than kind of dealing with the ports and going back inland? And so, yeah. I can answer the questions too, you see. I can actually make the questions and then answer them, which is quite effective. Maybe next year we don't even need a panel, I don't know. So, I mean, in terms of the Mexican railways, Chuck, you alluded to working with them to deal with some of those issues. Are you satisfied with the engagement from the railways about some of the issues that we're facing? We're not implying that it's necessarily their fault. I mean, these are issues that are sort of socioeconomic, political, et cetera. But we've had some interesting presentations from some rail experts, security experts that the railways employ, and so just for those in the audience who might not have heard those, what are some of the ways that you're engaging with the railways and working with them to improve this? You gave a good example, but.
So I think the leader in the space is KCSM, and Jim, I forget his last name.
Yeah.
He's dynamite. He's spoken for us at our conferences, and I think the way they approach it is really holistic, right? So they're understanding their workers. They have apps on their phones, so they understand where their workers are, what their workers are doing when things stop. Because oftentimes, because of the economics, it can be inside jobs, right? They help us understand how we can change up what we're doing to throw the thieves off. So they're leading. I think FXE is doing a great job of trying. They're approaching it from a slightly different standpoint. They approach it more like, let's harden the site and let's try to push it up on a unit train, harden the train and push it up. That works okay, not quite as well, but they're working their tailbones off. Both of them are working their tailbones off, and I think it's a socioeconomic issue more than it is. It's going to be endemic until the economics of it aren't as good for the cartels. They've figured out the family stuff, but the cartel stuff they haven't figured out.
But to Mark's point about if it moves, it grooves, let's say. If it moves, it's okay, right? Some of those issues are also bottlenecks. We know the Celaya bypass issue. We've talked about it for years and years. I think that there is a projection that may be finished this year, but I'm not sure if that's still actually,
probably 18, realistically, it sounds like. Yeah.
So some of those issues are still infrastructural. There are some bottlenecks that I imagine would help some of these issues.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'll echo Chuck's comments. I think the KCSM is a little more advanced or proactive, if that's the right word. We see a greater share of the issue on the FXE, and that could just be how they're routed, right? But we do, and with our colleagues at VW to Mexico and now Audi Mexico, we work daily on new ideas, new ways to keep the freight moving, right? That's the ultimate goal. But also on additional securement devices, additional security, things we can do at the origin, because a lot of these things happen, I think, early on in the transportation cycle. So it's a constant battle, and I don't think it's anything I don't think it's easily solvable, right? It's always going to be an issue. The question is, how much of an issue is it going to continue to be?
Yeah. So there was a clarification question from the audience, from John Contravio. Did I hear correctly that most export vehicles from Honda move to the ports by truck as opposed to rail? This is one I could answer for you if you want, but I'll let you clarify that.
The question was, do most of our export vehicles move to the ports by truck?
Yeah, because that's the exports ex-NAFTA, right?
Yeah.
So what Charles is moving.
Yes. So Charles, I think I'm right, and 100% of your stuff is moving by truck to the ports. Right.
Yeah. So the Honda vehicles that are not going to the U.S. and Canada, basically,
right,
they're moving by truck to the ports. The vehicles that are moving via the ports to the U.S. are rail still.
Go by
They're
rail,
still rail.
right.
Yeah. Okay, great. We have a question right here in the front. So we're going to test the sprinting skills of Nimish. Yeah, come on.
Yeah, hi, Chris Kenmore from VNet again. Just talking about the rail, I mean, I'm sorry to harp on about the connected car again, but could the connected car help you in rail and to be able to, for example, if it is being attacked, send out a help signal? And then, you may not be able to answer something immediately, but you'll get the hotspots as to where it's happening, or you can understand what is being taken where, and then you can identify them by whom afterwards?
Well, it'll tell us where in the transportation chain the car got damaged, right? I mean, you're happening in some dark territory in Mexico. It's not like we're going to be able to send the cavalry and stop them. But I think it will help with analytics and figuring out where you've got the issues, right? So the answer to your question is yes.
I think it was Bill Kerrigan who alluded to earlier. This can be in Mexico context, but it needn't be. It's more general in ports. Vessel schedules being a challenge, more port stops, sort of slow steaming. Is this an issue that you're working with shipping lines to sort of get more visibility? I mean, in this age, it seems like there should be some visibility of a ship with 6,000 cars heading towards the shore. I know there's weather issues and stuff is there, but at least to kind of get as much advance notice as possible. Maybe starting from Chuck, what do you see on that?
Yeah, definitely. If we're talking, especially, so Mexico, trains to the port won't be departed unless we know they're on schedule to meet a ship, because especially on the East Coast in Veracruz, there isn't room, right, for all of us to be there at once. So that communication has actually been much more effective. So basically, just blocking and tackling, operationally scheduling things is a big help to keeping nonstop trains, right? Keeping us from loitering anywhere. We have good visibility to the ships coming in, and we have good communication with our partners, principally MOL and K-Line, to the point where if we're snowbound in Portland and it's going to cost us $200,000 to clear the snow, how about you go down here first and come back and save us $200,000? Yeah. So it's, I think, very good communication. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely some improvement that, for General Motors, we're looking at some capabilities to improve our, especially on our imports, our visibility. I think today there is some studies that we're looking at in sessions to try to look at what can we do to work with our ocean carriers, port processors to provide that better visibility for railroad. And I think for us, even though we are meeting our metrics with the ocean carrier, I think there's some improvements there for us as our volumes continue to grow for imports.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with Rick. That is one area of the supply chain where I think it's still tracked with pencils and spreadsheets. Yeah. And we're working on a much more proactive and automated real-time tracking for the vessels, and the Audi group has been way out in front of that, working on that. Yeah. And we hope to have that, and our colleagues from Porsche as well. But we hope to have that online and running very soon. It'll be a big help for the port planning and that vessel arrival schedule to make sure we're bringing in the right boats at the right time. So.
Yeah, great. Again, any questions, points from the audience? So one of the things we saw in our poll as well, we saw some pretty encouraging investment plans for port activities from this audience over the next 1 to 3 years, despite whatever we may or may not see in the market. From your perspective, from your company's perspective, are there specific kind of capacity bottlenecks in your port and shipping operations where you want to see? I mean, we've heard about yard and yard space. We know that there's an inventory issue, but are you if you were saying to your providers, invest here, target this, this is what I need most, what would be some examples you would say? I'm sure you're giving them, but maybe you can share to our audience.
Our biggest bottleneck is probably shared. It's Veracruz, and then probably secondary, it's Lázaro Cárdenas, which is being solved now by SSA for us, so that's wonderful. U.S. ports, we just did a review of all of our short sea ports, east and west, and they're operating quite well. And we don't tend to dwell more than 36, 48 hours, so it's operating quite well.
So this is a difficult one here, but no, I think for us, definitely where I see some investment is systems. Again, it goes back to understanding what our port processors can provide visibility to know, because we know exactly when our vessels are going to arrive, even though our technology is still being improved. But based on the volume that is coming in, what is the throughput of the actual port processor to actually get the units out, to also let our rail carriers and our truck carriers know. And then we all know there's a big issue with truck drivers, truck capacity that we run out on. So I think General Motors' philosophy is we like to process our vehicles, ship them, same thing, vehicles arrive, ship them. We don't hold vehicles, but there's times where we run into issues because of those potential gaps that we have.
We actually employ a process improvement position at every single port because, as I mentioned before, it's all about speed. And as we get into this softening of the market where the SAAR's gone down close to 1 million cars or whatever it is, and it's interesting because every OEM is going to tell you we're growing, right? So I'm not sure where that attrition's coming from. It's not us. But we have to continue always to look at the opportunities to go faster, to remake the wheel, as it were. Whether it's how we're releasing cars to carry or how we're configuring our truckaway area or our rail loadout, we're always looking at that and always looking at ways to turn screws to go a little bit faster because we don't have more space. Right. So as more and more cars come in, I have a choice to go off the property, which is very expensive, or go faster, and that's what we have to work on.
I thought it was a good point that it was Bill, right? Bill Carrigan said in Veracruz, 1.5 days could save 5 years of expansion time. So it's pretty powerful if you're able to make those things move. But in terms of working with your supplier base, your logistics provider base in this area, I doubt any would say that rates are at terribly high levels, and in the current climate. Are you looking on some longer term engagement with some to help perhaps facilitate these improvements, maybe in the context of some of the uncertainty ahead, or again, it's just supply demand and this is how it goes?
In the trucking world, there's a looming, like a 30% of the trucking capacity is teetering on the brink of a big problem, which while we don't use Jack Cooper, that'll be a big vacuum that happens if and when, maybe it's more like when, that collapses, right? So we got a keen eye on securing long-term capacity before that happens, because as soon as that happens, a lot of trucking companies, rightfully so, are going to be chasing that business. They'll be needed. There'll be a crunch for capacity, and rates will naturally go up. So that's probably our biggest concern in trying to secure long-term capacity in that range. We've got, I'll leave it at that.
I think there's a juxtaposition, right? It would be nice to lock up the relationships with the vendors, particularly the ones that we value a great deal for a long time. But you also have that dynamic in this industry, especially where it's always changing. Something is always changing. So, all of our purchasing runs through our colleagues in Europe as well, and they have a different mindset as to how those relationships would work. So we try to look as long as reasonably possible while understanding that this thing could turn on a dime, and we have to have some flexibility in it.
Yes, same agreement pretty much. If there's definitely some synergies there, we do look at long-term agreements with our suppliers, if it makes sense.
The danger, I think what you were alluding to is we don't know what it looks like 10 years down the line. Will the cars be 5 feet long? Can you get a 30 load factor on a truck? So you got to protect yourself in the way you write your agreements, for both parties, so that if there's a large shift in the economics of the transaction, you don't hammer your business partner, and you can also maybe share if it's a beneficial shift, you can share in that so that you don't make your agreement outdated as soon as that technology shifts.
Yeah. One of the things that Brandon mentioned in the first session was, he pointed to those indicators, the rising inventory, the rising incentives, drew some parallels to 06, 07, 08, and sort of will the OEMs be disciplined enough this time around? It's not a fair question because none of you are in control of any of that, so I'm not asking you to sort of make the full. Although, Chuck, you have, there's some allocation and sales production planning within your function or within some of your teams. So, can you give us some examples or ideas about if that discipline is, if some of the signs of discipline are there, or there's some tools or perhaps some metrics in place to help avoid going to that sort of level we had?
So with the, we got a sharp eye on the incentives because that puts downward pressure on the transaction price, lowers residual values. As soon as you buy a car for $5,000 less than I bought it, my residual value just went down. Customers don't like that. Banks don't like that. Yeah, in my role, we balance production for U.S. market, and every month we set the production values for 3 months out, and we can tweak them up to like a month out at a certain level. When you look at the incentive spends in the industry, typically Honda is at the very lowest part of that. We tend to feather our production quicker, and we just don't like having incentives. We've never done customer-focused incentives. We've done APR programs and that kind of stuff, but we've never done customer cash. It's always going to be a dealer incentive kind of thing, which translates into the price. But we've already feathered some production on some great product that we just don't want to go there with. So I think at least for us, we're looking to make sure it's a very solvent situation. We don't want to be pulling the market ahead. We want to have natural sales, not inflated. Yeah.
When you talk about sales planning, I mean, the easiest way to ease congestion for us, right, would be for them to build the right number of cars and the right type of cars that we want, right? But I don't envy the guys in our office that have to look into that crystal ball and try to do that. I mean, and there's some really, really smart people that do that work, but, in logistics, right, we're kind of the tail and we don't wag the dog very often, right? We kind of, and there are, believe it or not, much higher dollar financial decisions that are being made at the manufacturing level to keep plants operational, et cetera. So right now it's something that we work with. I know we at Volkswagen are working very, very hard to right-size the model mix to demand. And I think once we did that, we'll turn some corners. But it's very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, I mean, in General Motors, a good thing is now we have a new organization where we actually have everybody pretty much connected from our demand, supply, our planning, and also our logistics. So we're all together as one. So we have one leadership that actually, where we look at those bottlenecks, excuse me, and we look at those different avenues that could probably cause issues that where if we need to cut back on production of some sort, we actually can have that communication channel now.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you want to learn more about that, there's a nice magazine called Automotive Logistics. I believe it's a January-March issue, an interview with Jim Bevenzi. Well, sorry, we don't allow advertisements on stage. You're right, yeah. Okay, no, thank you for that. Another thing we've heard the forecast for you, again, in a poll, the audience thinks I think it was 25% in 10 years will be electric vehicle. If you look at the Volkswagen plans over the next 10 years, not necessarily in the sales, but the number of electric vehicle models that are coming out it's big. GM has the Bolt, there's much more to come. Honda has electrification plans. So looking ahead a little bit, what would be, and maybe it's obvious, but I don't know, it's worth thinking through. Maybe starting with today, I mean, for moving the Bolt or anything like that, is there anything you're doing differently, any considerations in the port in terms of monitoring batteries and the state of charge, and looking out to a situation where a chunk of your vehicles would be electric? 10, 20%. What sort of changes would we need to see?
Definitely for General Motors, as we continue to increase our battery vehicles. We have the Bolt, which today is the leader in that segment. I think from our ports, we are looking to be able to handle those capabilities. If the vehicle is able, if it does lose power, what resources or what capabilities do you actually have to handle our vehicles? And bringing those different ideas or different information could work with our engineering group to pretty much understand what needs to happen. But I think it's coming. I mean, I think more and more today we're shipping those vehicles to Europe. We're shipping them to Asia. So we have already started. But as the market continues to change, you will see more electric vehicles coming on those platforms to different regions.
Yeah.
I think for us, and we've got a fairly small sample with our EV right now, but I think the distribution as compared to combustion engine vehicles is different.
Yeah.
The demand for the car doesn't exist in large pieces of geography in the country, such that we don't even serve it out of all 4 of our import locations. So it'll be interesting to see if and how that dynamic might change. And the other interesting thing we've run into, and again, it's a fairly small sample, is when you have issues with these vehicles, the entire process of of sourcing a power plant for one of those cars. And returning the other one is very difficult and very expensive. So that's the other thing that we've been watching very carefully. As you mentioned, we're planning to get much more heavily invested in EVs, and it's going to be something that we have to watch and create a footprint for at the port level.
Sure.
Very similar, and we're studying it now. I think we've publicly announced we plan by 2030 to sell about 2/3 of our vehicles will be electrified, so the whole Clarity series. Right now, moving them through the ports and the system is there's no big issue with it. They have enough battery power. If they had to start to dwell for a long, long time, that'd be different. But right now, but you're right, components, if in the unfortunate case of a crash or something like this, it's not just a body shop visit anymore. You've got a lot of more technical stuff involved, and in some cases, you have to have much different capabilities at the body shop to separate things so that you don't have big explosions.
Yeah. In terms of, sorry, did I see a hand up here? Just a figment of my imagination, I guess, yeah. What was I going to say? In terms of emissions in your vehicle logistics chain, what you measure, what you track, what you try to reduce, that could be via changing modes, but also alternative fuels, perhaps with carriers, maybe different energy things in your terminals. I mean, is this something you've got more of a focus on now? And if do you anticipate it'll be more? Because we have examples in other regions of the world and conferences where this is becoming a much bigger focus. Perhaps it's different here, I'm not sure, but I just want to throw it out there for you.
Well, we certainly do now. We're focusing our energy at this point on the electric vehicle technology on the vehicle production side. But on the logistics side as well, we've long had a policy of looking at the footprint and the gas. It's one of the reasons we like rail so much. I mean, quite frankly, you can move bulk commodities generally cheaper, and it's much less of an impact to the environment on a train. But that's its own set of challenges with rail, particularly now. But that's one of the reasons we focus on rail when we do move cars. So.
Yeah, same.
Okay. We have a Blue Skies for Our Children initiative, so we're very focused on greening the car and everything up through production. I mean, I think all of our factories are zero landfill, so nothing goes to landfill anymore. It's all being recycled. In logistics, probably the last 5 years, we've been looking at how do we reduce the greenhouse gas impact of that. So when we did the Talladega project, we made sure part of the component of that, when we were shuttling trucks down to Talladega from our plant in Lincoln, we wanted them to be CNG or LNG. So our partner had to build a fleet of LNG and put a fueling station in order to get that contract with us. We don't have that. That was a unique situation. We don't have that stipulated in our contracts, but it's one of our decision analysis criteria when we're looking at suppliers. So in the trucking world, the newness of the fleet, what are the things they do to be fuel efficient? When we see opportunities for milk runs where the infrastructure exists to do LNG or CNG, we're kind of hoping for that, and we'll make a longer contract if we can have a partner who will do that for us, these kind of things. We're excited about the FEC. They're doing, Florida East Coast is doing, all LNG up and down the coast for us. Tote Marine is converting their ships proactively. I think a lot of it is also economics and being a good neighbor in the communities they serve. Of course, we've got K-Line and MOL have their hybrid ships running, and in the Atlantic, we're taking that ride from Europe on some of the routes. So it's a focus. We report on it every 6 months to our board of directors, and it's part of our annual report to our shareholders.
Mark, if I'm not mistaken, I think Volkswagen actually has chartered some vessels coming up in 2019, which are LNG, CNG.
Correct.
Yeah. So we'll start right here in the front, make it easy, and then we'll move into the back.
Thank you. Paul Birnbaum, Ports America Group. We heard a lot about infrastructure. We heard about systems. In one of the votes, 49%, the number was 49% that people were the most important item for selecting a port and terminal operator. So could the panel expand on what actually that means in terms of people?
That's how I voted as well. I think it's still a people business. And when you're partnering, and we try to have long-term partnerships where, quite honestly, our goal is that for the same exact money, partner would drop VW's business and come work for Honda, right? Just kidding. So really, a lot of the technology, you have to have, if our rail service has to be there, our rail partner has to be there. So that's a no-brainer. That's a must-have. A lot of technology is at parity. A lot of things are at parity when you look at it. Quality, I would say, is almost at parity. If someone damages one of our vehicles, they buy it. So I just sold another car. Charles, there's another way to sell cars. Have them damage our cars. So really, to us, the people, for me anyway, the people make a huge. That's it, right? Because I don't ever want to go to contract language or to legal to get something done. I want to have the relationship, and if we've got great relationships with our partners, everything goes much smoother. And our goal is to grow the pie and give everybody more pie. So anyway, that's my simple answer.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, people is definitely important because as today, if we have any form of issues with our vehicle, which we normally don't, but if there is any of a retrofit, you want to make sure that the port processors or any of the suppliers understand our product, and that longevity of when these workers are actually at the port. So I mean, like example, FAPS. I know we all work very closely with them. I know they have a team where they actually have people that have been working there 20, 30 years, and I know that's important, and knowing our vehicle and knowing our product. So I think that's definitely a good thing why people, I would say, is definitely important.
I'd actually phrase it a little differently, and I would call it relationships, not people. I think in a relationship where I'm trying to spend as little money as possible and you're trying to maximize your revenue, there's that pocket of trust that you develop, right? That you trust that you're working together toward a common goal. And there's a handful of vendor partners that we have that I know if I pick up the telephone and make a call that we're going to work together to find a solution that works for both of us every single time. And it's very difficult to put a value on that. I mean, I still subscribe, that a handshake is as good as any written contract you don't want to have to allude back to. So I would absolutely agree that the relationships with people are the most important part of any business relationship.
We had a question from Charles in the back, if he still wants to. It's dangerous.
Yes, my question is going back to long-term contracts, and it also ties in with green initiatives. Have any of you done any studies on the impact of the 20-25% sulfur cap? Because none of my vessel companies are willing to give you a contract most of them beyond 2018, because they know that that's going to impact the cost of fuel as well as retrofitting these vessels. Does anybody have any idea how that may impact us?
I actually can't answer that.
No, I mean, I think that's a question that, to be honest, if anyone in the audience has an answer or wants to weigh in, by all means. Although, again, it's perhaps predicting the future isn't the forte here. So it's a good question, Charles. I wish we had the answer for you.
He stumped us.
Yeah. One thing that was interesting, I recall in Europe when I would hear as well, when the low sulfur emission zones came in, was in 2015 when the ultra low, and then there was anticipation for a shock, because bunker prices were going to double, treble. It just so happened that the oil price fell to $30 a barrel, and everyone seemed to dodge a bullet. So there's perhaps some complacency in the industry that was a result of that. But we just talked about the LNG, and I know in Europe, where the zone is coming fully into force, also in the Mediterranean, because it's already in the Baltic and English Sea, English Channel. There's a number of shipping lines who are investing fully in LNG, or have spent a lot of money on scrubbers that literally scrub out the fuel. So there's some measures that are being done, but I think there's also not a full clarity across the industry in terms of all of the zones and the timings, because I think the IMO has a phased approach. This is just my limited view, so I think that might be playing a little bit of a role there as well.
Interesting.
Good question. We have another question right there in the middle.
Race.
Oh, it's a race. Oh, birthday boy gets there first. Pit him at the post.
We're talking about vandalized vehicles. Are there any trends and developments on separate flows of finished products other than just factory to dealership? And vandalized vehicles, I would suspect, have to take a separate flow that has to be developed and thought about. And are there other such flows that happen in the shipping from factory to dealership that are kind of side flows that aren't typical? And are they growing or are they developing?
I'm not sure I'm answering your question correctly, but one thing that we do, we have advanced notification of theft and vandalism at the border crossing. We actually have created some routing and some differential solutions. Rather than taking those vehicles into the port where they sit like anchors, or those rail cars sit, we actually take them to somewhere port adjacent where we are able to get them body shopped and fixed and things like that. So we are working those cars around that process where they do sit and impinge on the other things that we're trying to do.
Yeah. We've got a couple of facilities that we use specifically for taking care of that, and that it is a completely different flow, and then we will unassign those from the dealer they're heading for, and then depending on the damage, we'll either reassign them or send them to auction. So it's a completely different flow. They come out of the stream and then they go back in the stream if we can resell them. If they're, depending on the level of damage, we can't sell them as new, so that we'll do something else with them.
I mean, similar process that we do at General Motors.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments from the audience? So one of the things that again came up earlier today was the use of inland port facilities, and obviously you mentioned Talladega, which functions more or less right as an inland port. I guess Houston for you guys to a certain extent, or do you? I'm not sure if you would consider, or is that because you rail in? So
Yeah, you ask a very good question, right? So we're a German company, we're a European company, but just in my tenure with VW, we have shifted from the majority of our product coming from Europe to the majority of our product now sourced either in the U.S. or in Mexico, right? So if you take a step back and look at that model and the fact that I use Houston, which is a port operation, and I don't know what the number is off the top of my head, but let's say 75% of the freight I'm taking into Houston to mix with the European freight is coming by rail from Mexico. Right. Why am I paying port rent for that freight when I can take it inland closer to market? You have the issue of mix for proper load building and everything and getting to your destinations, to your dealers, but there is a big school of thought that wonders why the Mexican cars are still going into ports, right? They don't have to do that.
Right.
So it is something that we look at very carefully right now.
Yeah.
It's all part of our big study.
Yeah. Anyone else want to comment on the potential inland ports that you are using or may explore further in the future?
I mean, I know today we are looking at some other ports, like more of the through the Great Lakes. I mean, that is something that we are studying with our engineering team. More to come on that, but that is not something that we're actually just opening share at the moment.
Okay. Yeah.
I think the one example that we'll use inbound to our distribution centers and use those as inland ports, depending on. So Ohio's a big one for us.
Yeah.
That works out really well. At certain times of the year, it becomes more problematic just because the volume's in a surge. But yeah, it does make sense. We already own the land.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an interesting discussion and one that I think will pick up in other conferences as well. Glovis has the example in Shreveport, and obviously there's efficiencies you can get with facilities like this as well in terms of hub and spoke moves and things like that. So although someone in Europe always used to say that hub and spoke, they're more like hub and spooky. So there was a sort of resistance to double handle and risk of damage. So there's some industry kind of prejudice sometimes, I think, across some of these things, but maybe there's some potential for change in the future. Give you guys another chance. We're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. Is there any last questions from the audience to the panel? So I guess, I want to flip it around a little and give the panel. So if we're looking at this session was meant to be kind of about preparing for the future and ensuring that we're prepared for the future. So, what advice would you give to your partners here today listening to sort of stay relevant to your companies, say, over the next 5-10 years with all the changes that we anticipate, but also, as TQ mentioned, the things that won't change, like perhaps the pricing that you don't necessarily want to change, but maybe just some parting words of advice for our audience.
I think the easy answer at the port level is I need more space, right? That's the easy answer, particularly if we're slowing down a little bit and our cars are dwelling a little bit longer. But I do believe that the connected car, and particularly the blockchaining, where we're all speaking to each other, has tremendous potential to change completely what we do. And I would say that those of us that are out on the front of that technology and that connected relationship are going to be the ones that stick around for the long term.
Yeah, I would say continue for General Motors. Continue to bring options to the table. I mean, that is a big thing for us because we're always looking for new potential areas to move, to pretty much look at the whole network, break apart the network, and if there's a cost savings initiatives there, we'll definitely take a look at it. So as we continue to grow new products, new autonomous vehicles coming out, I mean, with all the different things and what we got going on for General Motors, I said that would be definitely a big thing. And infrastructure, I think that's also big. A lot of ports, do bring those options to the table, but that is definitely key as volumes continue to grow. So I would say.
I think being ready for change, embracing change. I think we're going to continue to see increased frequency and amplitude of major shifts. I mean, with the Amazon effect, we were talking earlier about Tesla and Elon Musk. He's basically busted the franchise dealer network, right? He's pretty close to, he's run through it. And if that if a shift like that continues, how we sell cars, how people purchase them is going to change. The millennials aren't buying cars as much as they're sharing cars or using Uber and Lyft and a Zip car and these kind of things. So I think if the autonomous vehicles come quicker, I mean, I was talking to Steve Sayre the other night about what are you going to do with your business model when our cars marshal themselves and drive themselves on rail, So, we want to optimize the current model that we're operating in. And you're right, cost is good, continuous pressure on cost because the R&D costs that all the manufacturers incur to get all these technologies into the cars by mandate and by customer desire, those costs are going up while the pressure on our prices is going this way. So we're going to have to squeeze our operating costs even more in order to make this model work. So I would say, work hard on our current model to make innovations and look at what the new model might look like and be building that with some of the funds from the current business model, just broadly speaking. And to your point, bring innovations and then slap us around if we're not listening.
And technology too.
Yeah.
That's important. That's one point I want to mention.
That is a good point, but I would prefer to end on the slap us around if it's not working, because I think that's a good message. No, I want to thank. Those are, I think, some very good points from our panelists. We'll stop the Q&A there. So give a round of applause, please, for our panel. I don't envy what you have to do in some ways in this industry. I think Chuck kind of enunciated there a little bit in terms of optimizing the current value, but being model, but being ready for change. Because on a day-to-day basis, what you need is space. What you need is rail car optimization. What you need is the ships to come on time. But in a little bit more of the long term, it's a bit harder to say what exactly we're going to need. So you're going to need to be flexible. You're going to still need each other, because in that change, those relationships will also stay important, even if it's Alexa calling for the releasing the rail car or changing the way that the accessories are ordered. But nevertheless, the coordination and the relationships that sort of cement that, I think, will remain in one way or another. And we got to kind of stay ready, flexible, and open for them. I want to thank all of our speakers today and all of you who ask questions, who engage, who participate. This is what it's all about. I think this has been the best Baltimore conference so far, Rick. I mean, great numbers, great engagement. Really, we covered many things top to bottom. Of course, there's many other things we haven't got a chance to discuss as yet, but that's why we get together and keep on doing this. Quick reminder: when we finish here, we're gonna go downstairs and straight out the main entrance, and then you go to Pratt Street left. It's the Pratt Street Ale House for the Port of Baltimore hosted drinks reception, so we can continue carrying on the discussion. Just so, just to keep you all a little bit informed, you'll see some brochures around, but, we hope to see some of you or many of you next month in Detroit for our global conference, or failing that, next year at either our Mexico conference in January in Mexico City, or back in California for the Finished Vehicle Logistics Conference. Or, if you're on holiday somewhere, or you fancy, escaping the winter and you want to come to Chennai or Sao Paulo or any of the other places that we offer on our global tour, then please follow up with us and do join. We'd love to have you. And keep in touch with us. Like we say, we build these programs based on your feedback, based on your engagement with me on the magazine, with Marcus Williams, who's in the second row there, senior editor, or our team back in London, with Louis Akumi. How can we forget? I think it's the first his name has come up, but none of it. We're always, his presence looms large over all of these events. And so continue to engage with us and let us know what we should be covering, what we should be talking about. There is that iPads, or some iPads, which have been going around. Hopefully, if you've got it, you've had a chance to give us some feedback. If you haven't, you'll still have a chance on the way out. Or just email me, email any of our staff, call us up, tell us what you think. We'll always take it very, very seriously. Once again, so a big thank you from my side, a big thank you to the Port of Baltimore and our other sponsors for their support, and to all of our speakers for their engagement, and let's have a beer. Oh, and how can I forget a happy 75th birthday to Matt Allard in the back. He'll buy you all a round of drinks at the Pratt Street Ale House.